Greetings and welcome. You're tuned into TMH Daily English News, and we're back with more updates from you from the past weekend as well as yesterday. As we move on to our headlines for today, the Tigray Armed Forces have foiled Eritrean's offensive and decimated their units. The UN says Eritrean troops shelled town in the northern region of Ethiopia, and two Eritrean prisoners of war, confess of participating in this current ongoing Tigray genocide. As we move on to our main updates for today, the Tigrayan Armed Forces said an offensive launched by the Eritreans has been thwarted and the units deployed by the Isaias regime decimated. Tigray Armed Forces Central Command said that Tigray Armed Forces successfully repulsed an attack by the Eritrean forces on the 24th of May in northern western Tigray zone, and the Central Command disclosed that the Eritrean government deployed 2 brigades and 1 battalion and launched an attack in northwestern Tigray in a bid to control an area called Gazagile. The Tigray Armed Forces put up a defense and a counteroffensive in which a brigade commander, 3 battalion commanders, and more than 300 soldiers were killed or otherwise wounded. Many weapons and materials were also captured in this siege, and the Central Command said following this debacle, the Eritrean army shelled Shararo on the 29th and 30th of May as well, causing civilian casualties. Member of Tigray Armed Forces Central Command, Getachew Reda, said it is clear that the Eritrean regime will stop at nothing to drag the region into an interminable conflict and sabotage or perceived after they said they wanted peace. Writing on his official Twitter account, Getachew Reda urged the international community to exert pressure on the regime to reverse course. He reiterated the Tigray government's unwillingness to let the regime prolong the suffering of its continued people. The UN says Eritrean troops shelled town in the northern region of Ethiopia, and the Eritrean forces shelled a town in northern Ethiopia over the weekend, and according to the internal UN documents and regional forces, in a rare bombardment after what has been 2 months of relative peace within the Tigray conflict. Bulletins from the United Nations says Reuters cited information from humanitarian organizations in Shararo saying at least 23 rounds were fired, and some hitting a school housing displaced for families. A 14-year-old girl was killed and at least 18 people were injured and 12 houses were damaged, one of the documents alluded to. TPLF spokesperson Getachew Reda tweeted, "As part of their desperate attempt to escalate the tension and drag us into the more action they shelled Shararo on the 28th and 29th of May." Ethiopia's military spokesman, Colonel Getaneth Adana, government spokesman Legasa Tulu, did not return Reuters' message seeking comment. Earlier this year, Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki told state media his troops would intervene again and should Tigrayan forces attack his country or threaten Ethiopia's stability. 2 Eritrean prisoners of war have confessed to participating in Tigray's genocide, one of them admitting to killing 32 civilians and raping 23 women. The people of war made the admission during an interview with Tigray TV. Let's take a listen.
عدقرات وعدقرات كأخهم شمون تدين قلاتي أبزي من بعد.
I killed about 7 in Shararo, about 8 in Adigrat, 7 or 8 in Adwa, and 9 in Ramah. I raped 6 in Shararo, 5 in Adwa, 6 in Adigrat, and also 6 in Ramah. I looted mattresses, stools, tires, and gold necklaces, which I took to my mother back in Eritrea.
عدقرات كم هذا شد اشتغل أبزي رامخا شد شدة قال عمدي كم وزي فراش وشدة زين خرسخة قوم قال كم وشدة حاتين كم وركي ها
نكسر وسير خارو نشتي
إذا خمسة نستي هو شدة
من دايو كان
ها
من هي كايو
السنة صدرها وشدة
من ندي خابين سويت خاب من هي كايو
عندي تمر عقونك
من هي كايو
من صدرها هدي
من نديها
ونديه بيه
جيت هناك مرة نيرو نزرعها كيا هسام ولا نزرعها كيا ولا نسيتي نزرعها كيا أرجيت مقطاري نيرو
ما بدنا رايت هبة
تقتلنا بهاشي شرونا بهاشي شراب.
As the fighting was intense, we were killing indiscriminately anyone, including children, women, and the elderly. From Shararo all the way to Shura, we were killing, and I can't give exact figures on how many. After Shura, we entered the Hitzat and Mai Afni refugee camps, where executed about 10 people. We undertook operations at night in Hitzat and Mai Ani refugee camps and dispersed all of the refugees.
كأس نيرنا أو بليتنا كأس أزنها فحجنا له مع مالتي يهدي منهم وأنا خطفوا هم همزة تجري.
Article 19 has urged the Ethiopian government to immediately release all of the detained journalists. Article 19, an international organization defending freedom of expression and information, said it is concerned with the arrests of at least 16 journalists within the country. We call on all of the government to unconditionally release them and stop intimidating the media, Article 19 stated in their statement. And the recent arrests are part of a partner of intimidation, as well as a pattern of harassment against the media and the Ethiopian government's attempt to gag the flow of information regarding the ongoing conflict and genocide. 6 Tigrayan architectural experts in Ma'ala call for the international pressure on the Ethiopian government to allow necessary agricultural inputs, as they said the international community should now allow Ethiopian government to disseminate Tigray's agricultural sector. Temni Bayru has more on this update.
Agriculture is the lifeblood of Tigrayan society. Nearly 3/4 of the Tigray people are farmers, and agriculture comprises more than a third of the region's economic output. Over the last 3 decades, Ethiopia's federal government and its partners took the need for agricultural development seriously and viewed it as a matter of survival. These concerted efforts greatly increased crop productivity from 400,000 metric tons in 1991 to 2.1 million in 2019, and vulnerability to hunger decreased and poverty declined from 48 to 29% between 1991 and 2018. According to the agriculture experts, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed appears to be withholding seeds, fertilizer, and other essential agricultural inputs from Tigrayans as a part of his wartime strategy. Ethiopia's federal government and its allies launched the war partly in concerted effort to destroy the region's economy. Among the crimes against humanity targeting Tigrayans, agricultural inputs have been blockaded and used as a weapon of war. Amid the conflict, various components of the region's food security system have been removed. This has destroyed many of the hard-earned agricultural improvements in Tigray over the last few decades. Farmer training centers, plant protection facilities, irrigation facilities, agricultural investments, agricultural input supply chains, and extension systems have been intentionally dismantled. As academic John Nelson and his colleagues detail, hostile forces from Ethiopia and Eritrea deliberately hampered crop production, looted and killed livestock, and destroyed farm inputs and tools. Remote sensing and witnesses confirmed that farming has been either greatly inhibited or completely disrupted. Even worse, the farming population of Western Tigray has been ethnically cleansed, internally displaced, or forcibly migrated and prevented from engaging in agricultural activities. In Western Tigray, rain-fed crops were largely left unharvested in 2020, and among the largest hit areas sampled by Nason Research Team, 57% of irrigation farms on the banks of the Takaza River and 89% of Walqait sugarcane were abandoned in 2021. The central government has imposed a siege on Tigray for much of the war, including by denying nearly all humanitarian access. Perhaps most consequentially for subsistence farmers and others in Tigray, the continuing siege is blocking access to agricultural inputs like inorganic fertilizer, improved seeds, and pesticides. With the long rains planting season approaching, humanitarian partners have mobilized only 11% of the required fertilizer, 9% of staple crop seeds, and 2.5% of the required vegetable seeds. Given many impediments, inorganic fertilizer and other agricultural inputs were not used during the current irrigation season, exacerbating food insecurity and the broader humanitarian crisis. As a consequence of the crisis, an estimated 150 to 200,000 starvation deaths have occurred in Tigray. As a measure of goodwill by the federal government, the experts demand the delivery of 60,000 metric tons of fertilizers, 50,000 metric tons of seeds, and 100,000 liters of pesticides and insecticides so that our farmers can use these inputs for the coming rainy season. Vaccines, drugs, and equipment are also needed in Tigray for at least 12 million livestock. They urged the international community to put pressure on the Ethiopian government and its allies to allow unhindered humanitarian access to Tigray and to provide support in the form of agricultural inputs. The international community should not allow the Ethiopian government to decimate Tigray's agricultural sector, punish ordinary Tigrayans through man-made famine, and undermine the people's livestock as a part of its war effort against Tigray's regional government.
Professor Jatil Tramvol says Jawar Mohammed's recent interview has showed that he has overlooked or ignored the justice element within this Tigray war. Jatil Tramvol, peace and conflict studies researcher specializing in the Horn of Africa, made this remark during an interview with UMD Media. Let's take a listen.
But again, he is very much focused on peace and then forgets or overlooks or ignores the justice element. That how should Ethiopia be held accountable? How should the political leadership of Ethiopia, the military leadership of Ethiopia, be held accountable for the atrocities having been committed in Tigray as the responsible entity for these atrocities? That is totally overlooked. And again, I think it alludes to the fact that he is viewing himself as a character to reckon with when it comes to the political negotiations now ongoing at the center. The
professor also added that Jawar Mohammed, member of the Oromo National Congress leadership, recently released from prison, also seems not to want to alienate Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki as well.
He's, I think in many Tigrayans' view, very soft, or he doesn't criticize the massive atrocities that Eritrean forces committed on Tigrayan people. The massive slaughtering of innocent civilians, the rape of Eritrean women, and so on and so forth, is not duly considered, which might be a bit of surprise to many's eyes, because apparently then he doesn't want to alienate Isaias Afwerki. So he looks upon, at least it comes forward, that Jawar looks upon Isaias as a player he needs to relate to in Ethiopian politics going forward.
Professor Jatil Tramvol also noted that Jawar Mohammed seems to be gravitating himself to the center, thus distancing himself from the long run, the Oromo struggle for self-determination. Our final update today, the UK government says the conflict in northern Ethiopia has potential to escalate as well as spread quite quickly. The UK government's Ethiopian travel advisory indicated that there is military conflict that's currently ongoing in the northern region and that it has potential to escalate and spread quickly and with little warning. The UK government advised its citizens against all travel to the Tigray region and to parts of the northern Amhara region as well as western Afar region, and it alluded to the reports of incidents along the Addis Ababa corridor, Bahar Dar Road, including those of armed men attacking random vehicles. The advisory indicated that there has been an increase in sporadic conflicts between armed groups within the Oromia region as well as the Amhara region. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be back for some more tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Bye.